Hello, I'm NatZombieGames, and this is how I made my most recent project, the NZG software launcher. Annoyingly, unlike a game, it's difficult to show background footage while I talk, so here's random footage of me using the launcher spliced up to make it seem like I have more footage than I do. The original idea for this project, which started it off, was in part me wanting to get better at networking code, and except for the tiny bit in the net music program, I've never messed with networking before, and I wanted a more central place for people to get and know about my software, hence the NZG software launcher. The initial commit was on the 2nd of May, and the 1.0.0 release was on the 14th of June, so a little over a month from start to finish. In the time I've managed to create software which uses frequent multi-threading, networking, and multi-threaded networking, which are all new to me. I actually put comments in most of the code, unlike my prior projects which had none, and managed to get a bit better at shaders, as currently GitHub lists the project as 1.8% GD shader, some of which are fully custom and others are modified versions of other people's shaders. Also, the app can update itself without you having to go back to GitHub to install new updates. As I didn't want to make a launcher for my launcher, I had to find another way to fix this, and opposed to seeing how other people do it, I came up with my own, likely worse and more convoluted option. First we go to the latest release like normal using the lower level API manager functions, which we will get to later, and then we check the response codes. The first time we grab the release for the user platform and then requested the new URL, and then the next time if we are redirected, which for the API manager is listed as failure, we then grab where it wants us to go next before requesting there instead, and then, if all's gone to plan, we now have the actual binary as a response from GitHub. Then we go to the directory the launcher is in currently, and until we find a name that isn't an existing file, we keep generating random names. When we find an unused name, we write the downloaded binary to that file, close it, and then open it with the argument kill old NSL process with the current launcher's name as the argument before quitting. Then, if all has worked, the new instance will launch, check its arguments and see the kill old NSL process, and delete the old launch file before renaming itself to the old launcher's name, effectively replacing the old one with the new, updated version. Again, there may be better ways that other people do this, but this works enough for now. Next point is the API manager, which handles all the networking for the whole project, by far the biggest script in the project and possibly that I have ever written, over 700 lines, which including comments, 175 lines for just the initial variable and class declaration. This is after it was nearly entirely reworked and rewritten from how it was, as it was terrible before. It has details on every product, caches for all the information types, and a small response class which it uses the return type for most of the functions to store the info about the connection, request, fetch, or whatever else it needs to return. Part of why I rewrote it was to make it more expandable and flexible. In the first version, many parts of the code was repeating itself over and over, making it a way bigger headache to update and debug. So the idea was for the new rewrite to make two lower level functions in underscore connect to host and underscore request URL, which handle connecting a client to a host and fetching/downloading content respectively, and then of the higher level ones like fetch info and validate key, use those to handle that logic, opposed to before where every function handled connecting and requesting and its own logic unnecessarily. I say this like it's some revolutionary thing, but this is just basic functional programming practices. Honestly, now that I know how it works, networking isn't that bad. The more annoying thing is using other people's APIs, since they can make things however they want, which can often end up being entirely against what you expect. For example, GitHub, when you use up all your rate limit tokens, instead of returning the rate limited HTTP response code, they return access denied. Or with itch.io returning a float value for the upload ID, but they want you to provide it later, they want it as an integer. A good amount of the code is just working around the weird infrastructure practices their APIs employ, opposed to the fundamental networking infrastructure. Another thing I have learned from this project, and that the API manager makes heavy use of, enums. They're very useful for storing lists of values, partly due to how Godot's autocomplete lets you type them out faster. Most of the time anyway, sometimes it doesn't work for some reason, but more often than not it's great. Moving on to visual fluff. For my prior projects, I always made everything in a set color scheme which was a dark mode adjacent look. Some people like light mode for some unthinkable reason, and others like to customize it to make it more unique. So another thing I wanted to learn for this project was making a color manager, which allows for updating of every background and style box used from a set list of 6 colors. 2 background colors, 2 highlights, a separator, and a shaded color. One of these is changed, it then reapplies all the colors to the style boxes and color racks, before then going through the nodes in the group stylebox haver, and sets their style boxes accordingly. So now people can change all the colors of the app to make it as grotesque as they want. Moving on to shaders, 3 of them are modified versions of Nord's rotate texture from GodotShaders.com. By modified I mean I stole the rotate function they made and then changed it to do what I wanted, either rotating it by a constant amount or making it rotate like a bell ringing. But most of the shaders are original, even if they're the more basic ones. The most complex one I wrote fully myself would be the progress visualizer, used by the download toast in the top right if you have info for nerds enabled. That takes a starting and ending Y position, a shaded and unshaded color, and a progress value, and alters the texture to effectively become a vertical progress bar, which the download icon uses to represent how much the current download is left for downloads which don't prompt the download screen to appear. Another part of this project which I wanted to focus on was the UI as a whole. UI has never exactly been my strong suit, so I wanted to try and improve on it a lot, hence so many shaders and putting a lot of effort into making everything nice to use and customizable. I think it turned out well and isn't too horrid to look at. I also put details into smaller things like making some buttons track to being hovered or pressed, or making the settings cogwheel spin while you hover over it before slowly stopping again, or making most of the menus fade and slide in and out opposed to just popping in. Now onto some closing remarks and a mention of the next project I'm planning. This was definitely a new and challenging experience. As said at the top of this video, networking and multi-threading are both new to me, so making a project which focuses and centers on multi-threaded networking code was an experience to say the least. But now it is fairly smooth to see a product, read its description, and then download it, and fairly quickly start using it. Another thing was the error log system I made, which has a very in-depth printing system for writing the logs out, but it will likely help me out at some point in the future with debugging and development. It already did when trying to get the self-updating to work properly. I hope, like all of my software, to keep updating this launcher into the future, even if infrequently. As I don't have a central server to store a list of all my products on, for now they are all hard-coded in. Ideally in the future, it could download the product list and details from a server instead of having to be updated every time I release something new, but this works for now. Now, unlike in my mining idle video, this is actually what my next project will be, opposed to me saying what it will be and then doing something entirely different. Next I plan to do devlogs about my next, currently unnamed game, which will be a sort of puzzle, sort of idle / automation game about wiring low-level circuits, making different things out of binary. So yes, the person with games in the name is actually going to make a game instead of a software. Shocker. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope to make more videos soon. I disappeared for a while and tried making progress reports daily, which didn't work, so here's hoping I can have any type of upload frequency. If you are interested, you can check out my prior games and software, which now includes my music program, my bad password software you shouldn't use since I want to remake it, now my software launcher, and my prior game mining idle, all of which are available inside my software launcher, or available on my Edge or GitHub pages. So I've been NatZombieGames, and I don't have an outro.